Greg, good morning, and thank you for being with us and accepting this interview for Abax Focus. First of all, I'd like to ask you, we see that Convergence Partners Communications Infrastructure, which is a private equity fund, has been investing solely in the ICT sector in Africa so far. Why this exclusive focus on ICT?
I think it's underpinned by a couple of factors as to why we've decided to focus on the ICT and communications sector in particular. I think it's underpinned by within the sort of senior management of Convergence Partners, there's a very strong skill set within this sector. A lot of us having either come directly from the industry or having previously had sort of a lot of work within the sector. So that's sort of the one aspect of it. The other one is really we really do see sort of ICT and telecommunications as a strong development tool within Africa. There's numerous reports out of the United Nations and other sort of NGOs that sort of underpins the sort of growth in GDP and other developmental angles through the sort of growth of the ICT sector, and sort of more specifically towards sort of mobile penetration is mostly where most of these reports go, where there's sort of exponential growth based on growth of the economy based on underlying mobile penetration, for example.
Does that mean that you intend to further increase your investments in the sector as far as the fund is concerned? And if yes, where in particular?
Okay, so yes, we'll continue to be focused within the technology sector. Historically we were very focused on the telecommunications sector and the sort of internet portion of the business. We're slowly sort of starting to take on a broader mandate within the technology sector as a whole. So we look at, for example, payments platforms, software as a service, etc. So we're sort of expanding our investment mandate slightly as we continue down this path. Specifically, sort of opportunities we're looking at the moment, we've recently announced two exciting transactions, one out of East Africa, which is called Wenanchi Business Services. That transaction, we signed the agreements probably in April. That will give us additional presence now in places like Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, Zambia. And then the second transaction we announced was the C-Squared transaction, which is an acquisition from Google. And C-Squared deploys metro fiber networks in various countries across Africa. They've got existing operations in Ghana and in Uganda. And they've just announced, I think they announced last week that they're going to deploy a metro fiber network in Liberia. So those are probably the most recent transactions that we've undertaken. But we continue to look for new opportunities, and we've got a sort of very strong pipeline across large portions of the continent.
Thank you. Do you reckon that the private equity model will in the future remain the best one for you to ensure the growth and profitability of your investing companies?
Yes, I mean there's basically an ecosystem that most companies go through. So you've got the venture capital aspect of the ecosystem that helps develop early stage companies that are often startups or pre-profitability, and then they sort of, once they get to profitability or have a strong path towards profitability, often the private equity players will come into the mix, come on board as shareholders, inject additional growth capital. And then the private equity funds often have a limited lifespan within which they can invest. So typically that will be somewhere between 5 and 10 years, for example. And after that, they have to exit because they need to realize the cash for their investors, or they could choose to exit at an opportunistic time. And then normally the business can be on-sold to another private equity company, for example, or into the industry within which that company operates. So there's definitely the private equity model plays an important role in that ecosystem. So So especially going from sort of a more entrepreneurial type business and then putting in all the systems and governance structures in order to sort of further develop that company and make it attractive to potential trade buyers.
Are there any specific constraints or challenges that your companies had to go through when you were investing in the sector in Africa?
Look, all the countries in which we operate have their own unique sort of constraints and challenges, and some of those are sort of macroeconomic risks and political risks around the actual economy, the underlying economy itself, or political risks with just general instability. If you look at what's going on currently in a place like Zambia, where the president's pushing through some hard reforms and there's a fairly high degree of sort of uncertainty there. And then you look at places like Mozambique, where they've had their own challenges, sort of macroeconomic challenges. I mean, it's been compounded by the fact that there's been a slump in resources, but that's compounded by a huge amount of debt which was disclosed, and the consequential impact has been on the economy itself. So we continue to face these challenges, but as Convergence Partners is a long-term investor, we sort of typically invest somewhere between 5 and 10 years. We can often sort of ride through these sort of cyclical challenges. So, another challenge that we commonly face is sort of the migration of businesses from being very entrepreneurial and sort of in that growth phase to sort of trying to build in the underlying structures and the governance structures and policies and procedures to sort of get them to that next level of maturity. But you often find that the entrepreneurs and our partners, once they see the benefits of it, they're sort of willing participants.
Has Convergence had any impact socially or environmentally on where you've been investing in Africa?
Yeah, Jabir, it's as an investor, we take our sort of social, environmental, and governance structures quite seriously, both in Convergence Partners itself as a fund manager, but also in our underlying investee companies. So, I mean, in every company we go into, some of the sort of first big changes we make are to the sort of the overall sort of social and governance aspects of the company. We also try and instill a strong sense of sort of social development within the countries within which we operate. So, by example, if you look at a company like CCOM that Convergence Partners has been invested in since the sort of startup of CCOM, the CCOM provides a highly subsidized broadband internet to educational institutions in order to make it affordable for these institutions to have basically unlimited bandwidth. So that's an example. More recently, one of our investments in Malawi, Skyband, which is an ISP, it's now started deploying a metro fiber network. However, in order to do that, they've agreed with the municipality of Lilongwe that's at Skyband's cost. We will put up lighting poles. So there's those poles that run along the streets in Lilongwe. They don't have many of those. So we've committed as part of our fiber rollout, we'll actually put street poles up, and then the municipality can use those street poles for providing utilities like just lighting from a safety point of view, and they can also generate additional revenue by putting advertising banners, etc., on those poles.
Thank you. Have you been following the development of the ICT sector in Mauritius? And if yes, do you have any comments on where we've reached in comparison with what I would call some of the best-in-class examples on the continent?
Look, we don't, as a fund, we don't have a particular focus on any market. We tend to focus on sub-Saharan Africa as a region. So we tend to, Mauritius as a standalone environment, we haven't particularly focused on. It's a relatively well-developed ICT ecosystem. You've got good levels of infrastructure. You've got submarine cables coming here. You've got a well-educated population. So it's, in our view, the Mauritian ICT sector is very well developed and continues to grow based on the backing that it gets from the Mauritian government.
corporate governance is increasingly recognized as a lever of shareholder growth, especially for African companies. Do you find such opportunities for corporate governance at the level of your investing companies or at the level of your fund itself?
Yeah, so corporate governance is a key element of a lot of private equity companies. We start thinking about governance before we even make the initial investment in a company. A lot of our original the sort of documentation on which we invest, it has a very strong underpin of governance around it. So often in investment companies or in companies that we invest in, when we come on board, some of the sort of early stage changes that we make is definitely on the governance side of things, instilling sort of appropriate reporting requirements, for example, creation of a board of directors that has the right representation, creating subcommittees like an audit, risk and remuneration subcommittees, depending on the size of the business and whether it's appropriate. But it's very much a key focus of sort of Convergence Partners, and then we instill that discipline and that sort of that culture of governance onto our underlying investments and management teams.
Thank you very much, Greg. Anything that probably you would want to add for the benefit of the people who will be reading the interview and listening to your interview?
No, I don't think so. I think that's it. Thanks, Shabir.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.